اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباءهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشروا بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. وضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا ما لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي على عبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخلوا الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعد من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين. إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون. وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون. والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك التقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى أداك الأرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أن حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون. وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا شريك لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلا حين. وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون. وما تأتيهم من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها مهردين. وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلا أهليهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلا ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إنا أصحاب الجنات اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد ضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تأكلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمون أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسكناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يأكلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحيق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وضللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يأذنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يروا إنسان أنا خلقنا لهم من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال ما يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من شجر الأكدار نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو خلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون اللهم صل على سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وهزلها كل شيء وذللها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنورك وجهك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء Sorry. Yeah, it is loading. Thank you. Sorry. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وهزلها كل شيء وذللها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحدث العصام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النكام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحير النعام اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبت وكل خطيئة أحدثتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفي بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزيني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال هذا متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني باسمك راضيا قانيا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعزم فيما عند رعبته اللهم عزم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وزرى أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لكبائي ساترا ولا لشيء من أملك به بالحسن مبدل خيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرعت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي اللهم مولاي كم من كبيه سترت وكم من فاده من البلاء أكلت وكم من إساري وكيت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهله نشرت اللهم عزم بلائي وفرت بي سوء حالي وكسرت بي أعمالي وأكادتني بأحلالي وحبسني النفي بود عملي وحدتني دنيا بخرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي فاسألك بعزتي أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفزح بها في ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تؤجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملت في خلواتي من سوء فيلي وإساتي ودوام تفريط وجهالتي وكسر الشهوات وخفلتي وكني اللهم بعزتك لي في كل أحوالي رعوفا ولا جميع أموري أتوفا إلهي وربي من لي خيرك أسألك كشف زري والنظر في أمري إلهي ومولاي أجريت على حكم اتبعت في هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فهرني بما أهوى وأسده على ذلك الكذا فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وحلفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميل ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه كذاك والزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد آتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي مؤتذرا نادما منكسرا مستكيلا مستغفرا منيبا مكرا مذئنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزا أتوجه إلي في أمري خيرا قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في ساعة رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة زري وفكني من شد وساكي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني وركة جلدي ودكة عزمي يا من بيدي خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتعزيني حبني لابتداء كرمك وسالفك بري بك يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهجابه لساني من ذكرك وتقد ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي حازيا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم أن تضيع من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيت ورحمت وليت شيري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا ولا ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادها ولا قلوب الترف بإلهيتك محققة ولا زمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت حاشية ولا جوارها ساعت إلى أوتان تعبدك تآيت وأشارت باستغفارك مذئنا ما هاك ظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك أنك يا كريم يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها ألا أن ذلك بلاء مكروه وقليل مقسو يسير بكاه كثير المدة فكيف احتمال لبلاء الآخرة وجليل الوقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول المدة ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن عذبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها زجولي وأبكي لعليم العذاب وشدة عمل طول البلاء ومدة فلئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فحبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وحبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناتك لازجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج الآمنين ولا سخن إليك صراخ المستغيثين ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولا أنادين أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا خاية أعمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد المسلم سجن فيها بمخالفتي وذاك طعم عذابها بمعصيتي وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرتي وهو يزيج إليك زجيج المعامل رحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولا يا فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تولم النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يهرك لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه أم كيف تزر زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب أم كيف يرجو فصلك في إتكي منها فتترك فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به موحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أقتل لولا ما حكمت به من تعذب جاهدك وكزيت به من إحلاد معاندك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تحلد فيها المعاندين وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالكزية التي هتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تحبلي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمت وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل كبيه أسررت وكل جهل عملت قدمت وأولنت وأخفيت أو أظهرت وكل سيئة أمرت باستباقها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي ما جواري وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من وراهم وشاهد لما خفي عنه وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك ركي يا من بيد ناسيتي يا عليما بزري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك مأمورة وبحكمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في حكمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه مؤولي يا من إليه شكلت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قولي على حكمتك جواري واشدد على العزيمة جواني وحبلي جد في خشيتي والدوام في اتصالي بحكمتك حتى أسرها إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في بارز وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك ذنوب المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأعرض ومن كان لفقد فاجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأحسهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك وعاطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك وجعلني لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأكلني أسرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك كزيت على عبادك بإبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائي وزمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقت من فضلك رجائي واغفرني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لي لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من نفسه دواء وذكره شفاء وتاهة هنا ارحم من راس ماله الرجاء وسلاه البكاء يا سابي النعم يا دافع النكام يا نور المستخوشين في الظلم يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أحلو وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. الله صل على محمد وآل محمد. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
Sheikh Bilal and Dr. Dungrasi, respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight's Surah Yasin has been sponsored for the Ithal Thawab of the Marhumeens that are displayed on the screen. Let us recite Surah Fatiha for all Marhumeens. Bismillah. Tomorrow, Friday, Salatul Jummah will begin at 11:15 a.m. with Sheikh Bilal, starting with Du'a Nudba. And on Sunday, Madrasa classes will start at 10:45 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Please join me in reciting the ayah of Amma Yujib 5 times for all those who are sick here and around the world. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustaraiza da'u wa yakshifu su. 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 Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Please recite aloud salawat for Sheikh Bilal. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فتعالى الله الملك الحق، ولا تعجل بالقرآن من قبل أن يقضى إليك وحيه، وقل ربي زدني علما. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلى على محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Briefly in our discussion of fiqh that we have on Thursday nights, there is something in Islam, in Madhab Ja'fari, called Qa'idatul Ilzam. Qa'idatul Ilzam refers to the necessity of saying that every person or every nation that enacts according to their fiqh, their actions are valid and correct. Let me explain where the fundamental of this question and this issue comes up. In Islam, we believe that nikah is the accurate representation of a marriage contract, and a marriage between a man and a woman, specifically, is enacted through the performance of nikah. Let's say, for example, someone's not a Muslim, and they come and they say that I'm married. Do we believe in the validity of that relationship? Qaidatul Ilzam insists that we believe in the validity of a relationship if it's enacted according to those people. There's a statement that we have that لِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ nikah, that every people have a marriage, and that marriage is valid and considered valid according to the religion of Islam. The significance of understanding this is that even if someone isn't a Muslim, or is a Muslim but doesn't follow the madhab Ja'fari, whatever they enact according to their faith and their ideology is considered correct according to madhab Ja'fari, and it has to be respected. So it may happen that, for example, a non-Muslim says, I'm married, we respect that marriage in its place. A non-Muslim says, I'm divorced. If they are divorced according to the principles of their sect and of their culture and of their community, we respect that. The same comes true, for example, in our own Muslim communities, that, for example, the ahkam of marriage and divorce are a little bit different between madhab Ja'fari and the Ahl Sunnah. For example, in the Ahl Sunnah, to get married, you need 2 witnesses, and to get divorced, you need no witnesses. Madhab Ja'fari, the exact opposite is true. That to get married, you need no witnesses, but to get divorced, you have to have 2 witnesses. Now, if someone from the Sunni madhab comes and says that, yes, I'm married, we accept that marriage. It has witnesses, we don't require witnesses, it's still valid. Someone from the Ahl Sunnah comes and says, according to my madhab, I'm divorced. We don't say, no, your madhab doesn't know how to do divorce correctly, we don't believe in that divorce. Go do it properly. No. Qaidatul Ilzam insists that whatever a person enacts according to their faith is correct, and our obligation is to honor the dignity of each of these sects. One of the places where this becomes practical is in the rites of even burial. To explain, some of the rites in the ahkam of burial are different amongst the various madhahib. For example, there are some differences in the process of ghusl and even in the process of burial. When we go to the graveyard, Ja'fari school of thought graveyard, all of the graves, the right shoulder points in the direction of Qibla. Amongst the Ahl Sunnah, when you bury someone, you bury them with their feet facing the direction of Qibla. This becomes a difference in how the structure of the grave is laid out and the person is buried. If it so happens that, for example, a member of the Ahl Sunnah community passes away, when we go to bury them, we don't bury them according to our madhab. We don't say, no, the right answer here is to do it the way we do it, so we have to do it the way that we do it. No. Every person's religion has its dignity and respect, and every person's fiqh has its dignity and respect. And our obligation is not to enact our fiqh on another person who does not follow that sect, but to acknowledge and to follow their fiqh the way their sect dictates it. So even if, for example, a member of the Ahl Sunnah community was to pass away, and we were the only ones who were present, it would be our obligation to find someone who could enact their fiqh correctly, or to enact their fiqh correctly for them. And even the grave that we would arrange for them, except that they gave us permission otherwise. If they said, no, I want to be buried the way you want to be buried, then it's fine. Then I don't say, no, I can't do that for you. No. But if they haven't given us any instruction and someone passes away, and we know what their sect is, that's the other responsibility. That if we don't know, then we do what we can. We do the best that we can. But if we know their sect, we know their ideology, we know their perspective, our obligation becomes to enact their sect for them. We don't enforce our ideology upon another person. The same way we don't refuse to acknowledge someone's nikah or someone's divorce because it isn't done the way we do things. Our responsibility is to enact our faith for ourselves and to respect and allow the other faiths that exist in their thought process to execute and to acknowledge the contracts that they form and break amongst themselves, not on our standard. Otherwise, for example, sometimes this argument comes that, they don't even do nikah properly. They do nikah properly according to their ideology and their sect. This is sufficient for us. It doesn't have to be according to our ideology for us to acknowledge it. Every person by the basis of their faith. And this is how we ensure that the rights and responsibilities and individuality of each person is allowed for and accounted for in a society. So Qaidatul Ilzam, its purpose is to ensure that each people are enacted upon, not on the basis of what I believe to be correct, but rather upon the principles of what their faith and ideology presents for them, whether that comes in the aspect of marriage, inheritance, burial, divorce, are some of the major areas where these rules can find differences amongst our thought process and how we approach and how others approach. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. My intention is not to take long, but at the start of the new year, there are many things a person thinks about of the things and goals and desires that I want to establish within this year. And as such, there are certain important points of using this point of reflection and self-development to start a new thought process. The light of this discussion comes from the verse in Surah Taha, verse number 114, which in itself, in its entirety, is a very interesting verse, but from one element within it, which is a very interesting point that comes about. The verse itself, in it, it says, فَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ الْمَلِكُ الْحَقِّ. Then glory be to Most High is Allah, the true sovereign. And then it continues, وَلَا تَعْجَلْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ قَبْلَ أَنْ يُقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُهُ. This second part of this verse, Surah Taha, verse number 114, is a very significant mention in the Qur'an that gives us an explanation of the relationship between the Holy Prophet and the Qur'an. Allah says in this, He says, وَلَا تَعْجَلْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ قَبْلَ أَنْ يَقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُهُ. Allah says, and do not be hasty with the Qur'an before we give you the instruction or before we tell you to make the annunciation of the Qur'an. This statement, وَلَا تَعْجَلْ, the use of the word ta'jal itself is very specific. There are a number of different ways that Allah could have expressed His intention that do not be quick. There is sari', there's sabiq. Sari' is to do it rapidly, and in some cases it can be a very good thing to do things rapidly. And to do sibaq, and to compete, and to race with one another, or to race with a subject. In some cases it can be a good thing. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Allah tells you, go and to compete with one another, contest, race towards a good thing. But when Allah makes the use of the word ta'jal in this verse, this haste is a negative haste. And Allah is telling our Prophet, وَلَا تَعْجَلْ, do not be hasty with the Qur'an and its annunciation to the people before we يُقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُهُ, before we give you the instruction to give its revelation. This statement in the Qur'an is an explanation to say that the revelation of the Qur'an took place twice. Once the Qur'an was given to the Prophet, and in the Qur'an's entirety the Prophet possessed it. And then two was the revelation to people and society. In the Arabic language, these two are differentiated, and we've mentioned this before, by the use of the words of inzal and tanzil. Inzal is a revelation of something entirely in one instance, completely from beginning to end, we do inzal. Tanzil is a gradual process of revelation. This verse proves that inzal took place when Surah Qadr says, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr, that the entirety of the Qur'an was revealed to our Prophet in the night of Qadr. But our Prophet was not instructed to give the Qur'an in its entirety to the people. He possessed the Qur'an, but he was gradually given instruction on when the people could absorb and handle the Qur'an, and he slowly revealed it to the people. And Allah in this instance is explaining that, Ya Rasulullah, though you possess the Qur'an, don't be hasty in giving it to the people. Meaning whenever the Qur'an was revealed to the Prophet to give to the people, whenever the wahi was sent, that Ya ayyuha Rasul balligh, or announce, or tell, or to give instruction to the people, it was something that was already in the presence of the Prophet, that he then went and presented the people when Allah decided that this was the right time for the verse to be revealed. If Allah is telling the Prophet, don't be hasty, wait until we give you the instruction to reveal it, it means that the Prophet has this knowledge and possession of this knowledge, and his wanting to give it to the people is something that Allah wants done specifically when Allah indicates not before that time. Now, an interesting conversation, before we even get to the point of the conversation here, is the discussion about the idea that why would the Prophet want to be hasty? It's an interesting question within itself. There are a variety of different interpretations that can be associated with why the Prophet would want to be hasty. One, na'uzubillah, could be an explanation to say that he wanted to get rid of the Quran, na'uzubillah. The other is he had good intention to the people and he wanted to help them and knew that the Quran is something that would help them. And his desire was to help them as quickly as possible, but Allah is telling him, wait, the people are not ready for this yet. Wait until the people are ready, then present to them this knowledge and they will be able to absorb and to accept it. Which is one of the interesting conversations of why did it take the tanzeel of the Quran a period of 23 years? One of the explanations of why it took a period of 23 years is this exact process that every verse and every line and every word of the Quran be tied to practical examples and situations of the people of the time. So as the people progressed along their progress and progressed along the growth of faith, they became more and more palatable for them to process the Quran, and therefore Allah would reveal it at that particular moment and give them an explanation. One of the understandings that we have from this is that while our desire is that we become the perfect Muslim from day one, and we see another person who is shortfalling in their faith, we want to be for them to be the perfect Muslim as well too. But to allow people the progress to grow and to acknowledge that it takes time for people to grow. There are certain things that are mandatory, but even amongst the good things that we want to see in our community, we want to see in our family, we want to see in our children, give them the time to grow and to adapt to the message. And this is why Allah gives the explanation, and He says, وَلَا تَعْجَلْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ قَبْلَ أَنْ يُقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُهُ. That don't be hasty with this. Wait until I indicate to you the right time to bring this message to the people. Which is where this verse ends on a very interesting point. The third section of this verse, Allah says, وَقُلْ رَبِّي زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. And say, Ya Rasulullah, say, O my Lord, increase for me in my knowledge. This statement that our Prophet makes the request that, oh Allah, increase for me my knowledge. One of the instructions and understandings of this is to say that the knowledge that the Prophet possessed is entirely from Allah. There is no intermediary of a third person or a teacher that exists between our Prophet and what Allah wants him to receive, and that Allah is saying, Ya Rasulullah, come to me and I will give you more. This idea of knowledge and this process of the possession of knowledge is one of the important attributes of the Anbiya and of the Awsiya and of the representatives of Allah. Of all of the Anbiya, the differentiation between them is on the basis of knowledge. Those who possessed a greater knowledge were the Ulul Azm, and amongst those who were Ulul Azm, the one who possessed the greatest element of knowledge within any of the Anbiya was Khatimul Anbiya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The most perfect example of knowledge that could be possessed within humanity was none other than our Holy Prophet. The superiority of his progeny over all of the others is on the basis of their possession of that divine knowledge as well too. That when we take a look and we see that Allah gives an explanation of the great status of Ahlul Bayt, and we look in the Quran in the ayah of Tathir, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. اللهم صل على محمد. The explanation of what is this thorough purification? What is the purity that the Ahlul Bayt possessed? What is the sinlessness that the Ahlul Bayt possessed? This entire system of sinlessness is on the basis of the knowledge that they possessed. That the most important attribute of making that perfection within the Ahlul Bayt was not, for example, a divine bubble around them, but rather was the basis of knowledge. Which is why our sixth Imam would explain, our sinlessness is on the basis of knowledge. We can look at the impurity that exists within us and we see it as something that is reviled for us because we know of all of the harm within it, and that's why we abstain from it. Not that, for example, it's a miracle that we can't see it or that Allah forces us to stay away from it. No, but on the basis of their knowledge is their superiority over humanity. And the same is true or reflective in America, and not just in American, but in human society. That as knowledge increases, we start to look at the bad attributes and we see them as negative and we stay away from them. And where we're ignorant of them, we can accept them and be okay with them. This knowledge and the possession of knowledge is the most important attribute that humanity needs to process and go after. Which is why when we talk about the idea of starting a new year, starting this time frame and going through this process of setting goals, one of the most important goals to set and elements to work on is the attribute of increasing in knowledge. And that if Allah is commanding Rasulullah to continue to seek knowledge, then how could it be that we should ever plan to have a period in our life where the increase in knowledge is not one of our goals and items that we need to work on? To the extent where our Prophet would make a statement and he would say, any day where I go without an increase in my knowledge is a day that would not be blessed for me. This instruction of the Prophet is teaching us how significant the search for knowledge is, and that the superiority of humanity is going to be on the basis of knowledge. The same way that the Anbiya are separated on the basis of knowledge, so is humanity. That our increase in knowledge should be something that helps us along this path, and that we continuously look to the aspect that we need to increase in our knowledge and improve ourselves. The absence of knowledge is what causes mistakes and flaws within humanity and society. We'll look at two examples of this very briefly. One is the story of Nabi Musa and Hazrat al-Khizr. That when Musa alayhi salam goes to Khizr, it's a differentiation between the knowledge that the two possess that Allah wanted to expose. In some of the narrations that explain why was Musa forced to go to Khizr, the explanation comes that says that someone had asked Musa, "Oh Musa, who is the most knowledgeable on this earth? Or who is the most knowledgeable one that is present?" And Musa alayhi salam replies, "I am that one." Allah wants to show him that, "Oh Musa, even in your knowledge there is limitation. Yes, you may possess the knowledge of the Sharia of Bani Israel to its completion, but there is knowledge even outside of that that you don't have exposure to." And this is where Allah exposes Musa to the teacher Khizr. How Musa had to go to Khizr to learn something. Our Prophet is the one who is told, "Qul Rabbi zidni ilma." That, "Oh Lord, increase," and that Allah is the one who will increase him directly, showing again the superiority of Rasulullah over even Nabi Musa. But Musa, when we look at the story between him and Khizr, whether we look at the sinking of the boat, the killing of the boy, or we look at, for example, the rebuilding of the wall that takes place in the story and the narration between Musa and Khizr, we see that though Musa was the most knowledgeable of his Sharia, was not the most knowledgeable of the intention of Allah in every situation. And this is what explains that even the Anbiya, that possessing one type of knowledge is not sufficient. There is more that needs to be possessed, and Allah differentiates on this knowledge and its entirety. How Musa knew that the sinking of a boat, according to the Sharia, was wrong. But here Allah is showing him that there is more knowledge than what is apparent to you. That on its apparent you may say, "Oh Khizr, why did you sink this boat?" But what Khizr was doing was the explanation directly from Allah that there is more knowledge associated, that there is a goodness in this process that is better for them than the preservation of their boat or the killing of the boy. That it may be seen that Musa's reaction to this was based upon his knowledge, but that his knowledge was incomplete. And as a consequence of his knowledge being incomplete and not knowing that more knowledge could be had on the subject than what Musa possessed, is what caused Musa to call out to Khizr. And in the third state, the rebuilding of the wall. All of this is an explanation that Musa's knowledge of what should be done and how it should be done, and that there is a right upon the person who does work to seek compensation for it, is the apparent nature of something, but that there is even more knowledge beyond that Allah can give to a person. This idea that when knowledge has a shortcoming in it, that we can make a mistake, is epitomized in the example of Iblis. When we look at the story of Iblis, and Allah says that when I put the soul into Adam, I want all of creation to bow down to him. Iblis is the one who refuses to prostrate. And Iblis, what does he do? He says, "Ana khayran minhum, khalaqtani min narin wa khalaqtahu min tin." Iblis takes his limited amount of knowledge, which is what? That fire is better than clay. He uses that limited amount of knowledge, draws an analogy, and because of the limitation of his knowledge, makes a great mistake in the eyes of Allah. Something that casts him from his high status and position. Which tells us that knowledge is one of the most important things that we need to proceed in. When we have a shortcoming in knowledge, we are likely to make mistakes and go down the wrong path. Now in the case of Iblis, it was a sin to question Allah, and that Allah gave a command and Iblis refused it. In the case of Musa, it was not a sin, but it was an explanation to say that you may possess some knowledge, but the entirety of knowledge is what Allah possesses, and He has a right to reveal it to whomever He pleases. Your possession of some knowledge does not interpret to your possession of all relevant knowledge. For us, before we proceed further, the instruction here is what? When we see someone like Rahmatul lil Alameen, Allah is instructing him to make the dua, to search for knowledge and to ask for knowledge. Our obligation then is that we should make it that every part of our life is in the pursuit of knowledge and the gaining of knowledge. Now, again, before we move on to the conclusion of the argument and discussion, when we talk about gaining knowledge and the types of knowledge to gain, similar to what we mentioned last week about the idea that even a mubah act can become mustahab once it becomes tied to Allah, any aspect of knowledge can become the required and recommended to gain when it is tied to Allah. The difference between the Islamic view of how knowledge operates and the Western view of how knowledge operates is significant to understand in this context. In the Western system of knowledge, what we do is when we start, for example, a professional degree, we begin with a vast amount of knowledge and information, and through a period of time we bring it to a point specific to that field of knowledge and information. And we say that this knowledge and information, the more we become specialized in it, the more we isolate it from other types of information and tie it to that one specific knowledge base. That one becomes an expert in one field and not another. So I can be, for example, a PhD in economics, but don't talk to me about finance. Because finance is a different subject. That's not my area. I can be an expert in finance, but don't talk to me about math, because math is another study, another direction. Each of the ideas and principles behind this concept is that each of these becomes an individual specificity that a person possesses, and the goal is to become the specific expert of one specific item. And that's what the goal of pursuing that degree and that knowledge is. The Islamic view of knowledge is of something else. The Islamic view doesn't look at each segment of knowledge to be something separate, but rather each to be part of a whole that points back in the direction of Allah. That whether I become a mathematician, a finance expert, an economist, a chemist, a biologist, that each of these should be pointing me back in the direction of being aware of the Creator through His creation. If I can accomplish this through whichever means of knowledge that I go through, then I have continued my process of completing and increasing in my knowledge that Allah desires. So meaning there's nothing wrong with whether the knowledge that I pursue in my life is based on chemistry, on history, on math, on art. As long as the pursuit of that knowledge brings me back to Allah and makes me acknowledge the presence of Allah and the beauty of the Creator through His creation. Rather than to say that this one subject is my expertise, I say that this expertise in this subject is something that brings me to Allah. Once I follow this process of the intention of going back to Allah and seeing the signs of the Creator and growing in the direction of what Allah loves, then that aspect of knowledge becomes mustahab for me to earn. It becomes recommended for me to achieve, and it becomes a part of my ibadat of Allah, so that my status increases in the eyes of Allah. So it's not to say that, for example, any knowledge that we attain is useless unless if it's the knowledge of the Quran. No, all knowledge can be worship. So to say that, for example, the study of biology is a waste of time, no. Study of math is a waste of time, the study of medicine is a waste of no. All of these are good knowledge to attain as long as they're done with the intention of attaining proximity to Allah. And as I get older, whatever that knowledge may be that I attain, as long as I pursue this knowledge for the sake of Allah, it's mustahab, it's ibadah. But if you were to ask me as a blank slate, we would say that of all of the knowledge that exists, the most important knowledge that a man needs to achieve in his life is the knowledge of Allah and the aspect of how to worship Allah correctly. And that's because that is the most significant piece of knowledge towards attaining my purpose of creation, which is to fulfill the commands of Allah and to attain His reward. But the best way to attain Allah's reward, to attain heaven, is to fulfill the commands the way He's instructed me to fulfill my obligations the way He's commanded me, asked me to do. So therefore, of all of the things that I can learn and spend my time on, the best of them is to pursue the knowledge of faith and Islam. Now, to bring it to the last section of our discussion, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Back to the reference of Iblis. Incomplete knowledge can cause a person to sin. How do we protect ourselves from sinning when we know that our knowledge is incomplete? That there is a shortcoming in the information that we possess? None of us have reached the perfection of faith or knowledge. We all are in this process, in this journey of continuing down this path. Same as could be said about Iblis, that he was in the process, in the journey of attaining knowledge, and at one point in time, his lack of sufficiency in knowledge is what caused him to sin. Or if we look at, for example, the idea of Musa. Musa joined Hazrat Khizr to attain knowledge from Khizr. But his shortcoming of knowledge prevented him from continuing the relationship with Khizr. Khizr, at the end of the third story that happens after they build a wall, what does he say? He says, this is where you and I separate. That you cannot be patient with me anymore, and now I cannot and I will not teach you anymore. So what happened? The shortcoming of knowledge became the hindrance from attaining a greater status. Now in the case of Nabi Musa, it was a lesson to be taught. It was an instruction to be given. But in the case of Iblis, it was the start of his damnation. It was the start of his condemnation. It was the start of his being the accursed, Rajim. How do we protect ourselves when we're going down this path of knowledge and yet we have not attained the greatness of everything that we need in knowledge in our lives? For this, we can take a look and see that Allah has created for us a support system to protect us when our knowledge is incomplete. And that we look and we see in Surah Ankabut, verse number 45, where Allah says, وَأُتْلُ مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَلَذِكْرُ اللَّهِ الْأَكْبَرُ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ مَا تَصْنَعُونَ. Verse number 45 of Surah Ankabut is an interesting discussion and reference in which Allah is again speaking to our Prophet and giving instruction to him. He says, and recite what has been revealed to you from the book, and stand up for the performance of prayer. Certainly prayer keeps you away from indecency and evil. And remember Allah, and the remembrance of Allah is great, and Allah certainly knows that which you perform. This verse is the stopgap for where knowledge ends, how to ensure that the incomplete knowledge that we have doesn't cause our own downfall. Allah gives instruction and He says to our Prophet, recite that from the Quran. One, the recitation of the Quran is a comfort for our Prophet and an assistance, as well as a source of guidance. When we talk about the recitation of the Quran, it creates a light in the heart of the believer. That light in the heart of the believer is the source through which Allah increases in our knowledge. That through this tool we can improve our knowledge and receive better knowledge in what is beneficial to us by our affiliation and association with the Quran. And then secondly, he says, وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةِ, and stand up and perform the prayers. And that certainly this prayer will keep you away from indecency and evil. This recommendation and this aspect of the worship of Allah is where we find that though incomplete knowledge can be harmful to us, when we pair it with prayer, that prayer will protect us and guide us from the wrong mistakes and the problems that we can have. There is a hadith where Mufaddal ibn Umar, one of the companions of our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam, comes to our Imam and asks our Imam to explain to him of the grievous sins, what we call the great sins. And the Imam begins to enumerate the great sins. And he begins to enumerate and explain the conditions of them. And Mufaddal is one of the narrators who gives us the explanation of the mighty sins and the great punishments and the things that Allah dislikes, and those which have to be stayed away from, the kaba'ir. As the Imam goes through this process, Mufaddal, he goes to the Imam and he says, Yabna Rasulullah, wa amma tarikus salat. And what about the one who leaves his salat? You mentioned the great sins, but amongst the great sins, Imam, you didn't mention anything about the one who doesn't pray. Isn't the leaving of prayer a great sin? The Imam in his answer, the madmoon of the riwayah, the specificity of the riwayah, the Imam goes so far as to say that the one who doesn't pray is as if he is not even a Muslim. You're talking about the great sins are for the Muslim who makes a great sin and a mistake. The one who leaves his prayer is as if he is outside of the religion of Islam. The instruction of the importance of prayer and incorporating it as part of our faith as a protection for us to keep us away from the evil and indecencies that exist is one of those necessities that its absence is an absence of faith within itself. That nothing else will benefit you if this is missing. This is why it's referred to, Inna salata amud ad-din, that the pillar of faith is built around the foundation of salat. That without this salat, the prayer doesn't exist. It doesn't accomplish, the faith doesn't exist. Knowledge doesn't benefit you. Nothing will grow and benefit you. One of the stories of one of the older ulama, he explains and he says that in his time, there was a great poet one of the best poets of his time, and that poetry is one of the most beloved characteristics that a person can possess in the Arab culture. Why? Because it's a reflection of all of the knowledge that you possess and the ability to put together in beauty and ornamentation the mention of something great and azim in a manner that is worthy and befitting of it. The idea of poetry being beloved, and let me tell you something, it's hard for me to talk about poetry because I can't do poetry. You pick the language, I can't do it, I can't. Even in my own Arabic studies, I would stay away from, there's Alfiya, which is 2,000 lines of poetry. I can't do it. Poetry for me is very hard to appreciate, and I will tell you that right out, that for me to talk about poetry is very difficult. But poetry is beloved. The A'imma alayhimus salam would invite poets to recite poetry for them. And one who could recite poetry of Ahlul Bayt, they would be given great rewards. Whether we take a look in the court where Imam Rada was sitting, and the recitation of the poetry about Imam Hussein, whether we take a look at Imam Zainul Abidin by the Kaaba, and the recitation of poetry in the madh of Imam Zainul Abidin next to the Kaaba, and the rewards given to these people who are poets, demonstrate and show us that poetry is something beloved, is great value. So being a poet is something that's seen as a good quality. And there's one poet the scholar is talking about. He says that this poet was one of the best of his time, to the extent where he would travel in those days, years, long time ago, not like today where it's easy, you can get on a plane and wind up somewhere else in the world. I would be invited and transported around the world to recite the poetry that he would prepare for Ahlul Bayt and for the causes of his time. The alim says, I was sitting in a room with this poet, and I heard him make a statement. And in his statement, he went so far as to say, in such and such location where I have gone, no one better than me has ever recited poetry. No one better than me has ever spoken in this location. Scholar says, immediately as I heard this, my ears perked up. When he left, I asked his companion, this one, do you say he's a good Muslim? I said, Yani, he's good. The alim says, does he pray? I said, well, not really, but he's a good person. And immediately upon this statement, the alim knew where the shortcoming in this man was. He says his absence of prayer, nothing else is good in him. And he himself is bringing himself to condemnation, that look at how his pride and his ego have grown, that he dares to make the statement that no one better than me has ever been here. The alim's explanation of this statement and of this situation was to establish and show that when prayer is absent, the shortcoming of knowledge becomes hidden to us, and we begin to imagine ourselves as something great and azim. And that's where the mistakes come, and where, for example, one who has absence of true ibadat of Allah winds up making a great mistake and his ego takes over. For us, our goal, and one of the focuses of having the time to mention this, is that in these days and times where we have the opportunity to set goals for ourselves, where we have the ability to set an idea that at the beginning of this year, what do I hope to accomplish that I can measure for myself? It should never be absent from the aspect of gaining knowledge. Whether we be 6, 16, 60, 96, continue the process of improving and increasing in our knowledge and information. That if the best of humanity, the one who was a mercy to all of humanity, rahmatul lil alameen, who attained such a level that by his barakat and presence, every human being from then until the day of judgment has received benefits and mercy of Allah. If Allah is commanding him to seek knowledge, then there is no moment in time that we should be absent through the process of searching for knowledge. And that knowledge is anything that brings us to the guidance and the mercy and the acknowledgement of Allah. And to pair ourselves that knowledge doesn't become our source of our downfall, or that knowledge doesn't become something that causes harm to us instead of khair. It needs to be continued to be partnered with the salat and the worship of Allah. That one should not be without the other. That when these two are paired together, then we have the ability to attain something great in this world, whose reward will be given to us in the hereafter. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. We call out in this night of mercy, Ya Allah, 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 Ya Mahmud بحق محمد, Ya A'la بحق علي, يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة، يا محسن بحق الحسن، يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Oh Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Oh Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin, the mu'mineen in our community who have passed, and all those who are in need of dua. Oh Allah, we have gathered here on this Thursday night with hajat. By the right of this Thursday night, by the right of the mention of Ahlul Bayt in your Quran, fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities, and mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease. Ya Allah, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, there are those who are suffering through insecurity and difficulty and strife. Oh Allah, for the mu'mineen, give them aman wherever they are. Ya Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman, and entitle us to the ziyarat of Aba Abdullah in this world and the shafa of Aba Abdullah in the hereafter. One Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas, لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. متوجه زيارة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله، السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله، السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله، السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله، السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله، السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله، السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى، السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين، فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام مطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها، ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها، وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين، وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي، وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا، وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن. بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سلم، وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. زيارة حضرة علي أكبر عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا ابن حسين السلام عليك يا ابن حسين الشهيد، السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد، السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. زيارة شهداء كربلاء. السلام عليك يا أولياء الله وأحباءه، السلام عليكم يا أسفياء الله وأوداءه، السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله، السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدتي نساء العالمين، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. زيارة حضرة عباس عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصين، السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوتهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ورسوله ولأخيك فنعم المواسي، فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام، فنعم الصابر المجاهد محامي الناصر. والأخ الدافع الأخي المجيب إلى طاعة الرب الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل، وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليك يا علي زين العابدين ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى الكاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد التقي وعلي النقي والحسن العسكري ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن وكعبة الإيمان وإمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل